They called it unsolvable. A math professor, a full lecture hall, and a problem no one had cracked for decades. But then, from the back of the room, a quiet 10-year-old boy raised his hand. What happened next didn't just challenge mathematics. It challenged everything they thought they knew. If stories like this inspire you, hit subscribe and help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers, because the world needs to hear more voices like his. Nobody understood why Elijah always stood at the back of the classroom. At first, everyone thought it was a game. Then they thought it was defiance. But to Elijah, it was simply survival. "Elijah Thomas," barked Mrs. Bradford, her voice cold and sharp. "For the last time, take your seat or leave my classroom." The 10-year-old boy tightened his grip on the spiral notebook in his hands. His legs trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the ache in his lower back. Still, he stayed standing. I can't sit down, ma'am. It hurts too much." The room fell silent. A few students exchanged nervous glances. They'd seen the bruises when Elijah changed for Jim. They'd heard the whispers about what happened weeks ago, when he corrected Mrs. Bradford during a history lesson, and she'd slammed a thick textbook across his chair as he was about to sit. That chair hadn't broken, but something inside Elijah had. Mrs. Bradford sighed dramatically. "This is the third time this week you've refused to follow directions. I'm calling your mother again." Her lips curled into a tight, disapproving line. Elijah's fingers curled into fists, not in anger but in effort. He was holding back tears. His mother, a single parent working night shifts as a respiratory therapist, was already stretched thin. She'd complained to the school. Nothing changed. The principal had told her, "Some boys just seek attention." That afternoon, Elijah found himself once again in the hallway, notebook balanced on the window ledge, solving fractions while standing. But what the school missed, what even his classmates didn't notice, was what Elijah was doing instead of sitting. He was thinking. Constantly. Deeply. Numbers danced in his head like constellations. Equations unfolded like stories. While standing in pain, Elijah had learned to see math differently. Visually, intuitively, almost musically. He never told anyone that the pain helped him concentrate. Or maybe it just filtered out the noise of everything else. Racism, dismissal, the loneliness of being invisible in a crowded room. But things started to change the day Mr. Flores arrived. The young substitute math teacher had warm eyes and an empathetic smile. On his first day, he noticed Elijah standing at the back, quietly writing out advanced algebra on his own. "Is there a reason you're back there, Elijah?" he asked gently. It hurts to sit," Elijah replied, barely above a whisper. Mr. Flores nodded, said nothing, and walked away. Elijah expected to be scolded later, or worse, sent to the principal. But the next morning, there was a soft cushioned stool placed by the classroom window, and a note on top. "Stand if you need, sit if you can, learn however you must." Signed, Mr. F. It was the first time anyone at school had acknowledged his pain without questioning it. Elijah felt something unfamiliar in his chest. Not fear, not shame. It was dignity. That day, Mr. Flores handed out a puzzle to the class, an old number theory riddle even some adults couldn't solve. Most students stared blankly at their worksheets. Elijah glanced at it once, then smiled. Without hesitation, he picked up his pencil and began writing. Not the correct method taught in textbooks. His own. A method that came to him while he was half standing, half leaning, tracing invisible patterns in the air. By the end of class, he quietly handed his paper to Mr. Flores and walked out. Hours later, as the school emptied, Mr. Flores sat at his desk, staring at Elijah's solution in stunned silence. Not only had Elijah solved the riddle, he'd created an entirely new approach Mr. Flores had never seen before. The next day, Mr. Flores waited until the end of class before saying, "Elijah, would you stay a moment?" Elijah's heart skipped. He'd seen that look before, the beginning of trouble. But instead, Mr. Flores placed the paper on his desk. "Elijah, have you ever considered that you might be—" He paused, then smiled. "Oh, extraordinary." The boy blinked. No one had ever used that word with him. "Would you be willing," Mr. Flores continued, "to come with me this weekend to the university? There's a guest lecture on complex numbers. It's mostly for college students, but I think you'll have something to say." Elijah hesitated. "Will there be seats?" Mr. Flores nodded. "We'll make space for you to stand, whatever you need." For the first time in a long time, Elijah felt seen, but he had no idea how much more was about to change. The air at Westbridge University was crisp that Saturday morning, and Elijah's fingers tightened nervously around the straps of his backpack. He stood outside the towering glass building, his breath visible in the autumn chill. His mother, Camille, placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Remember," she said softly, "you don't need to impress anyone, just be you." "I don't even know if they'll let me inside," Elijah murmured. "You're not breaking in," she smiled. "You were invited." Mr. Flores emerged from the lobby, his coat flapping slightly in the breeze. "Morning, Elijah. Ready to meet a room full of people who think they've got math all figured out?" Elijah cracked a small grin. "Only think." Inside, the lecture hall was enormous. Walls lined with chalkboards, rows of elevated seating, and a massive projector screen casting formulas across the front wall. Professors and grad students milled about, coffee in hand, deep in pre-lecture debates. Elijah's presence drew quiet stares. A black boy, barely 5 feet tall, holding a worn notebook, standing near the back, while everyone else wore name tags and typed on laptops. He felt it again. That pressure, the invisible weight of not belonging. But then Mr. Flores spoke to a young TA and returned with a smile. "I found a spot for you, up top, standing area by the AV booth. Nobody will block your view. I brought a cushion, too, in case your back starts acting up." It wasn't just kindness. It was respect. Soon, the room dimmed, and the spotlight shifted to a stern-looking man in a charcoal suit. Dr. Adrian Kelmer, a tenured mathematician known as much for his brilliance as his ego. "Today," Dr. Kelmer began, "we examine a structure of numerical symmetry so elusive it has remained unresolved for generations." He turned to the board and scribbled a dense, tangled equation. Symbols looped over each other like a puzzle made of fog. "This," he declared, "is not solvable by traditional logic. Anyone who claims otherwise—" His eyes scanned the room, resting for a second too long on Elijah, his entertaining delusion, not mathematics. Chuckles rippled through the audience. Elijah's face flushed, but his eyes didn't leave the board. In that twisted formula, he saw something else, something no one else seemed to. He saw a rhythm, a cadence, like music. It reminded him of the jazz records his mother played when cooking, syncopated, layered, beautiful. His hands moved before he thought. The patterns formed themselves in his notebook. He didn't solve the equation. He translated it into something the numbers had been trying to say all along. He wasn't sure how much time passed before he felt Mr. Flores beside him. "What are you writing?" Elijah hesitated, unsure whether to answer. Then Mr. Flores leaned over, eyes widening. "You rearranged the initial form?" "I just followed the pulses," Elijah whispered. Like they were steps." Mr. Flores turned pale. Elijah, you just built a recursive mapping. That's not something you learn in school. Down below, Dr. Kelmer concluded, we theorize a solution may come in 30, perhaps 50 years. But for now, he raised his hands dramatically, we must accept that some problems are beyond reach. As he closed his notes, he scanned the audience again. Questions? No one raised a hand, not even the graduate students. And then, from the back of the hall, a single arm lifted. Dr. Kelmer narrowed his eyes. Yes, he said slowly. The young gentleman in the back. A murmur spread through the hall. Elijah's voice was quiet at first. It's not a question, sir. I think I found a way to reframe the equation. The pattern doesn't work algebraically, but if you graph it recursively, it creates a path, a loop that leads back to itself. The hall fell silent. Dr. Kelmer raised an eyebrow. You reframed it? Yes. Not to solve, but to listen to it. A few students chuckled. One muttered, "This isn't poetry." But Dr. Kelmer stepped forward, folding his arms. "Come down then, show us your loop, boy." Mr. Flores touched Elijah's shoulder. "Only if you want to." Elijah looked around at the strangers, the pressure, the stares. He could already feel the pain in his back growing sharper, but somewhere deep inside, something steadied him. He stepped forward. Not because he was sure, but because he had to try. Elijah's footsteps echoed as he descended the long aisle toward the front of the lecture hall. With every step, the murmurs grew louder. He could feel eyes on him, calculating, doubting, amused, but he didn't stop. At the podium, Dr. Kelmer stood motionless, his arms crossed, expression unreadable. "You said you have a loop," he said flatly. "Then show us. The board is yours." Elijah hesitated. The whiteboard towered over him. The marker in his hand felt slippery. He was too short to reach the middle of the board properly. No one offered to help, until a soft voice spoke from the front row. "He needs a stool." A woman, Professor Nina Reyes, a renowned number theorist, stood and rolled over a small step platform. "Here." Elijah climbed up, heart pounding. He began drawing. Slowly, precisely. Not numbers at first, but shapes. Then he layered them with symbols, arrows, sequences, recursive folds. His hand moved faster as the logic unfolded. The lecture hall, once buzzing, became quiet enough to hear the marker squeak. "This equation," Elijah began, "has always been approached like a wall, but it's actually a spiral. If you break its symmetry just slightly, it stops resisting." Dr. Kelmer's jaw tightened. Professor Reyes leaned forward. Her eyes lit up. "He's building a feedback inversion," she whispered to a colleague. Elijah pointed to a section of the board. "This step is what I call the echo. You think you're repeating values, but they're shifting behind the loop. If you plot the change, not the output, the pattern emerges." A voice called out from the third row. "That's not how we were taught to see it." "Exactly," Elijah said. "That's why no one hears it." He stepped back. The whiteboard was now full, swirling with notations that looked both chaotic and impossibly elegant. Then he turned to Dr. Kelmer. "It's not a full proof," Elijah admitted, "but it's a direction, one the numbers seem to want." A long pause. Dr. Kelmer walked to the board, staring at it. He raised the marker as if to challenge it, but didn't write. Instead, he asked, "What's this function here?" Elijah replied calmly, "It maps each reversal to its lowest persistent state." Another pause. Another twitch in Dr. Kelmer's jaw. "You're using intuition over formality," he said. "I use both," Elijah answered. "But I start with what feels alive." Laughter broke out from the back rows, not mocking but astonished. "Alive," someone said. "The kid's not wrong." Professor Reyes stood. "Dr. Kelmer, the student just made your impossibility theorem look like a stepping stone." Dr. Kelmer didn't respond. Instead, he turned to Elijah. "Your method, it's unconventional, your notation is inconsistent, and you lack any real academic foundation." He stepped closer, but, he added reluctantly, "it appears to work a beat." Then another professor called out, "Could you test it with x equals 11? Elijah took the marker and scribbled quickly. At 11, the echo value folds to 3, which realigns the sequence. Another murmured, "He's right." A young doctoral student stood up. "Can I see the echo curve again?" Soon, the lecture hall became a storm of discussion. Equations were rewritten. Phones took photos of the board. Voices, once dismissive, now buzzed with curiosity and awe. Mr. Flores watched from the back, a slow smile forming. Then Dr. Kelmer raised his hand. "Enough." The room quieted. He looked at Elijah, this child who had undone decades of certainty with a spiral and a whisper. "This is an anomaly," he said, "an intriguing one. But mathematics demands rigor. You cannot simply create new ways of seeing because it feels right." Then Professor Reyes stood, voice sharp. "And yet, that's how most breakthroughs begin, Adrian. You just don't like that it came from a child who stands when others sit." The room froze. Elijah stood very still. Then Dr. Kelmer said with grudging restraint, "Prepare your notes." "I want them. I will test every line." Elijah nodded. His knees were shaking, but his voice, steady as ever. The whiteboard still glowed with Elijah's markings long after the lecture officially ended. Students clustered around it, taking photos, reworking steps, arguing in low, urgent tones. Some scribbled furiously into their notebooks. Others just stared in awe. And at the center of it all, Elijah stood quietly by the podium, notebook clutched to his chest, unsure if he was allowed to feel proud or terrified. Mr. Flores appeared at his side. "You okay?" Elijah nodded slowly, but his voice cracked. "I think I need to sit." They found a bench outside the hall. As Elijah sat carefully, wincing, Mr. Flores crouched beside him. "You changed the entire room today. I didn't mean to make anyone angry." "You didn't. You made them think. That's harder and more powerful." Just then, Professor Reyes stepped out of the hall, holding her phone and a stack of scribbled papers. "Elijah," she said gently, "do you have a few minutes?" He looked up warily. "Am I in trouble?" She smiled. "Only in the best way." They walked to her office, walls lined with books, abstract math art, and awards. She offered him tea, but Elijah shook his head. He didn't want to sit again just yet. "I read through your notebook," she said. "Your notations, they're raw, but they're brilliant. You see structures most people don't even look for." He swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to break any rules." "You didn't. You bent a few, and sometimes bending leads to breakthroughs." She leaned forward. "Elijah, how did you learn to think this way?" "My mom," he answered softly. "She says, when things hurt, you have to pay attention to patterns. Pain is a pattern too." Professor Reyes blinked, stunned. Then a knock. Dr. Kelmer. He entered stiffly, but not as sharply as before. He held Elijah's notebook. "I reviewed your method again," he said. "I ran simulations. The structure holds, for 3 separate data sets." Elijah said nothing. "I still believe your model lacks formal rigor," Dr. Kelmer continued. "But the insight is undeniable. You've constructed a valid recursive approach where none existed." He hesitated, That silence said more than his words ever could. "You've challenged my work, and that's rare." Elijah stared at the floor. "You made me feel small." Dr. Kelmer paused, then nodded slowly. "Then let me do what mathematicians rarely do." He extended his hand. "I was wrong to dismiss you." Elijah shook it cautiously. Then another knock, this time a woman with short hair and a serious tone. Dean Michelle Langston, head of Student Equity and Outreach. "I just came from a very long conversation with Elijah's mother," she said, "and I have some questions." Professor Reyes sat up straighter. Dr. Kelmer backed away. Dean Langston continued. "Why was this child not supported at his school? Why was his physical condition ignored? Why is he here not as a participant but as a last-minute guest, invited by a substitute teacher?" Silence. "Elijah," she said, turning to him with a softer voice, "how long has it hurt to sit?" 3 months, he replied. "And how long since a teacher hit you?" His voice faltered. "Almost a year." She nodded, jaw clenched. "Then today is about more than math. It's about justice." She turned to the professors. "We're launching an inquiry, and in the meantime," she turned back to Elijah, "we'd like to invite you into a mentorship program here, a place where you can learn, grow, and never be told to sit down again." Elijah looked at Mr. Flores, then Professor Reyes. His eyes welled, not from pain, from relief. He nodded. "I'd like that." By Monday morning, Westbrook Elementary buzzed with rumors. "Did you hear Elijah was at a college this weekend? They say he embarrassed some big professor. My cousin at the university posted about it. There's photos." Elijah walked through the halls quieter than usual, clutching his books close, each step sending tremors of discomfort through his lower back. Yet something was different. For the first time, eyes didn't look through him. They noticed him. Inside room 4B, Mrs. Bradford paused mid-roll call as Elijah entered. Her gaze lingered on him, sharp, calculating. "Mr. Thomas," she said tightly, "take your seat." Elijah glanced at the hard plastic chair. Pain stabbed just from the thought. "I'll stand," he said firmly. Gasps fluttered through the room. Mrs. Bradford's jaw tightened. "We've discussed this before. You don't get to dictate classroom behavior." "I have documentation," Elijah replied, pulling a folded letter from his pocket. "From my doctor and from the university." Her hand trembled slightly as she snatched the letter. Before she could respond, a knock interrupted. Principal Rayburn entered, flanked by a tall woman in a blazer, Dean Langston. "Mrs. Bradford," the principal said, voice clipped, "may we speak with you outside?" Confusion spread across the classroom like spilled ink. Elijah didn't move. Through the window, he watched Mrs. Bradford's lips grow thin as Dean Langston spoke. Then, unexpectedly, Mrs. Bradford's face drained of color. Her eyes briefly flicked toward Elijah. Fear. When she returned, her tone was almost pleasant. "Class," she said carefully, "we'll continue our lesson in silence. Please take out your reading assignments." But Elijah remained standing, and this time, nobody said a word. That afternoon, Mr. Flores met him by the flagpole. "She's under review," he said simply. "So is the principal. Turns out a dozen parents filed complaints, but none of them reached the district." Elijah swallowed. "Why now?" "Because you made them listen." Later that day, Elijah sat, carefully, in a cushioned chair the school had never offered before, in a conference room surrounded by people he didn't know, but who now seemed to know everything about him. Superintendent Grayson, Dean Langston, several board members, and representatives from Westbridge University. "We reviewed the footage of the lecture," one said. Several faculty want to co-author a paper with you, another added. And we'd like your insight to help us redesign our gifted program, said a third. Elijah blinked. But I'm not gifted, he said slowly. At least, no one ever said I was. Dean Langston leaned forward. That's because your kind of brilliance doesn't fit on a test. It grows in silence, in defiance, and sometimes in pain. Superintendent Grayson nodded. Elijah, we want to create a space where your voice leads, where students who think like you aren't silenced, they're supported. Then she paused. Would you be willing to share your story, publicly? We believe it could change how this district sees students like you. Elijah felt his pulse in his ears, his throat dry. He wasn't sure what he feared more, being ignored or finally being heard. I'll try, he said, but only if it helps other kids. Dean Langston smiled. That's exactly the point. The auditorium wasn't as big as the one at Westbridge University, but it felt larger somehow, because this time Elijah stood center stage, not in front of equations, in front of people, teachers, principals, parents, students. The district had organized a community forum after pressure from local organizations, university faculty, and a handful of very determined voices, especially one small boy who once wasn't allowed to stand during class. Now, the room stood for him. Elijah adjusted the microphone, fingers trembling. He looked out and saw familiar faces, his mom, Mr. Flores, Professor Reyes, Dean Langston, but also Mrs. Bradford, sitting in the back row, arms folded tightly. He took a breath. My name is Elijah Thomas, he began. I'm 10. I like puzzles, jazz, and building things in my mind that don't exist yet, like shapes made of numbers. He paused. I used to think something was wrong with me because I couldn't sit in class, because every time I spoke up, someone said I was being disruptive. But I wasn't trying to make trouble, I was just trying to understand the world. Some teachers shifted in their seats. I was hit, I was ignored, I was told to stop standing, to stop thinking differently. And when I asked for help, I was told I was being dramatic. He looked directly at the back of the room. I'm not dramatic, I'm in pain, I was invisible. Silence. Elijah continued. But one teacher didn't look away. He saw what I saw, patterns where others saw nonsense. He brought me to a place where I didn't have to pretend I was okay just to be accepted. He held up his notebook. This is how I breathe when I can't speak. This is how I make sense of everything. I didn't solve that math problem to prove anyone wrong. I did it because I saw something beautiful, then quieter. And because no one believed me until I wrote it down. The audience was still. Then, applause, not polite, powerful, the kind that shakes the walls. Later that evening, as the crowd cleared, Elijah sat beside his mom in the quiet cafeteria. You were incredible, she whispered. He shrugged. I just told the truth. And you helped others tell theirs, she added, handing him a sealed envelope. He opened it. Inside, a full scholarship offer to Westbridge University's new Pattern Thinkers program. His name at the top. He smiled, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't hurt to sit. What would you have done in Elijah's place? Would you have raised your hand, even when no one believed in you? Tell us in the comments, because your voice matters too. And if this story moved you, hit subscribe and help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers. Let's keep sharing the stories of the quiet geniuses the world almost missed.